Welcome to video 2 in our 3-part video series on trauma. Today is all about what are the effects of trauma. And we have Jonathan Decker here with us to help us understand what the effects of trauma are.
Hello. Good to be here.
So we talked about in video 1 what trauma is. Remind us.
Trauma, initial trauma is you believe that your life and that your world is safe and secure, and then something happens and you discover that it's not. And so all the structures of it couldn't happen to me, or I'm protected, or I am prepared just kind of fall away.
Yeah.
And you're left with this feeling of helplessness and fear and terror. And so it becomes hard to self-manage. It becomes hard to just get through day by day, because you're always wondering when the next blow is going to come, when the next traumatic event is going to happen.
And so what different types of situations or what different types of trauma are there?
Trauma, a lot of different things can be traumatic and different levels of trauma, but a lot of it is abuse, right? So sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, also witnessing something catastrophic or horrific firsthand, or even witnessing it on the news can be traumatizing, right? Being present for something like that, or having an experience where your life is in jeopardy, or your safety or that of somebody you care about is in jeopardy. All of this can be incredibly traumatizing, as well as other things like betrayal, right? Thinking that your relationship is safe and secure and discovering that it's not. That can be traumatic and cause it all to come crashing down. Yeah.
And situations like serving in war or from military experience.
Police officers, firefighters, absolutely military, anyone whose life is on the line, right? And that kind of segues us from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which people experience when they have this traumatic event that upends their entire feeling of safety, and complex PTSD, where you go from, I thought I was safe and now I realize that I'm not, to day after day after day, I'm not safe. If I have a happy life, right, or if I have what I think is a secure life and something terrible happens, then I could develop PTSD. And now I have this belief that my world isn't safe. And what if that belief is confirmed over and over and over again? Maybe I enter into an abusive relationship, and day in, day out, I'm traumatized, right? Or if I'm a police officer on the streets or a soldier, overseas, day after day after day, my life is threatened. Day after day, I see terrible things happening. That is where complex PTSD develops, through torture, all these other things, because I now really know in my mind and in my heart, my world isn't safe. My life isn't safe. I'm not safe, right? And so it's just worse.
So the complex PTSD is when the abuse is ongoing. It could be for months, it could be for years, but it's ongoing.
Right.
Abuse.
And I think that's what makes it complex.
Right.
Is that if, let's say I have loving parents and I have a loving family, and then on a sleepover I'm sexually abused, for example, right? And then I go back to my loving parents and loving home, I will always be dealing with this fear of something else happening, but I still have a secure base.
Right.
But what happens if I'm put in a foster home, or I'm put somewhere else where the abuse is ongoing over and over and over again?
Or if you experienced ongoing abuse in your home growing up.
Yeah, which is the case for a lot of people, right? Then there is no safety, there is no place where I can go. And that's where, when we talk about complex, in the brain, we get really wired to believe this is how people are, this is how relationships are. Or if I can see elsewhere that this is not how their relationships are, what's the difference? I must be the difference.
Yeah.
And I often start to blame myself.
So what are the symptoms of PTSD? It's my understanding that there's 5 categories of requirements to meet PTSD. Can you walk us through them?
Yeah, absolutely. The first is exposure to some sort of traumatic event, or as you were saying, like a series of traumatic events or a traumatic life, right? Yeah. Exposure to this. The second element is invasive thoughts or re-experiencing. So for almost everybody suffering from PTSD, this involves an emotional component. Like you're triggered by a reminder, and you have these intense fear responses or these intense sadness responses, this panic that goes on right in the moment, and you remember what happened.
Yeah.
Also, nightmares happen for a lot of people. I mean, these are the ones that happen almost universally. For a smaller subset of people, you have these actual flashbacks, right? You hear about these with war veterans, where they actually think that they are back in the place where they were, and they actually think that they are re-experiencing it. And a lot of people think that is PTSD, and because that doesn't happen to me, I don't have PTSD. And that's not the case, right? That's not the case. But because we have these intense traumatic responses, emotional responses, where we relive in our mind or in our experience what happened, we become very avoidant. We become avoidant of the situations or the types of people, certain smells, certain sights, certain songs, all sorts of things. We just stay away from them. And that really, like we talked about in that first video, can impede and get in the way of how we live our lives, because we're always trying to skirt by. I know somebody who, they can't drive past a Walmart because their spouse met up with somebody in Walmart parking lot, and that's where they go off and do their thing, right? And so we become hyper avoidant, hyper aware, and we don't want to encounter these triggers.
Well, and I think invasive thoughts, it's so well summed up in that phrase. Like, you could be washing the dishes and all of a sudden a memory comes back.
Yeah.
And you get overwhelmed by the feeling that you can't control your own mind.
Yeah.
That out of nowhere, these thoughts come back. Thoughts that you don't want to remember, thoughts that you wish had never happened.
Yeah, and well-meaning family members, friends, they want you to get over it, right? And so they don't understand, you're not asking for this. You're not trying to fan the flames and keep this alive. It just keeps happening.
Well, if they even realize what's going on, there's so many people that hold that in and suffer silently from the shame, the guilt, the overwhelm. They don't even know how to handle it, let alone how to communicate that to someone else who doesn't even understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So with these avoidant symptoms, like we're triggered, so we avoid the triggers, and then we find that our moods and our emotions are really negatively affected. For example, some people get really, really angry and they don't understand why. Or they get really depressed and they lose interest in the things that they used to enjoy or used to be passionate about. They have a hard time getting out of bed, hard time showering, hard time functioning. Mm-hmm. They get panic attacks that they can't control, and they feel like the world's closing in on them, and they feel like they can't control it in any way, sense, or form.
Well, and another thing to bring up, trauma can affect your memory. Mm-hmm. It can affect your ability just to remember what's going on in your day-to-day life, because trauma does have an effect on your nervous system and your brain function and how your brain even communicates. And so there's probably been times where you feel like, well, I know there's been times where you feel like you're crazy or something's wrong with you, not realizing that all these things are an effect of trauma.
Yeah. Well, and then that leads to the question, like, I blame myself, right? Mm-hmm. I'm losing my mind. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And then oftentimes there's this heightened sense of blame. I should have been able to do something to stop this. I should have been able to prevent this. Or if I hadn't done X, then the other person wouldn't have done Y, right?
Or even, I couldn't control the situation then. Mm-hmm. I can't even control the situation now. So it's that the feeling of lack of control, and then doing absolutely everything in your power. Maybe your response is to do everything in your power to control your life now.
Yeah.
To keep yourself safe.
Which segues into this fifth component of PTSD, which is hypervigilance, increased arousal symptoms. When we talk about arousal, we're talking about heightened emotions, like really everything you feel is dialed up to an 11. And with hypervigilance, you're doing anything you can to keep yourself safe. And so you have a hard time sleeping. Any noise about the house will wake you up. Hard time falling asleep, hard time staying asleep. You're constantly, we talked about...
it's the constant surveying your environment to make sure you're safe.
Right.
Whether that's interpreting every word, every minute body language, whatever it is, you're hyper aware of everything that's going on in your environment to evaluate whether or not it's safe and whether or not you are acceptable, depending on the type of trauma you experienced.
Right. So let's say I get attacked by a shark while surfing, right? That would be traumatic.
Traumatic, yeah.
Bethany Hamilton, world famous surfer, had her arm bit off by a tiger shark while surfing, got back in the water, right? I always thought if a shark bit my arm off, I would be a swimming pool only type of person from that moment on, right?
Understandably so.
But this is her life, this is her passion, so she gets back in the water.
Yeah.
But can you imagine if that were me, every shadow in the water. It could be a school of fish. It could be a clump of seaweed.
Right.
It could just be the sun through the wave and how it plays with the water. Everything. I would be hyper vigilant. I would have a hard time surfing after that because I'd be too scared.
Yeah.
And with so many people who have PTSD, some days you collapse in on yourself and you can't function. Other days you're like, no, I have to live. I have to soldier through. So you push yourself out there, but then you're literally freaking out because everything invokes a startle response. Everything brings up this fear. And that leads to how trauma manifests. There's lots of different ways that it manifests, including nightmares. We got guilt, intrusive memories, poor judgment. Let's talk about poor judgment. Why do you think after trauma people might display poor judgment? Any ideas on that?
Maybe they think they deserve to be punished. Maybe if it's abuse they grew up with, maybe it's what they understand.
Yeah.
And the hell they know is better than the hell they don't know.
That fear of the unknown, right?
Yeah.
And we've got this weird thing psychologically as people where we recreate past experiences to try and sort them out, to try and figure them out. So many people who were abused growing up say, I'm never going to be in a relationship with someone like my father, right? For example, I'll never, and then they end up in relationships with people who do the exact same thing and treat the same way. They say, why do I keep stepping into this? One is because it's what they know, so they feel like they can manage it. But two, there's this sense of, if I can win this person's acceptance, if I can win their love, if I can get them to treat me well, then it shows that I had worth in the first place, right? Yeah. And so we end up trying to recreate the past so that we can have the future that we want. We already talked about flashbacks, insomnia, anxiety, loss of motivation, all these depressed symptoms, right? Hypervigilance, poor concentration. But let's talk about some of the physical and physiological aspects.
Well, and I think it's important to bring up poor self-esteem and negative self-image, regardless of the type of trauma you've experienced.
Yeah.
I have found those to be consistent.
Yeah.
Is that lack of worth, the lack of feeling you are good enough.
Yeah.
And that really crumbles the foundation of your life and what you believe you're good enough to do and to live and to have. And I think that's one of the reasons why trauma is so devastating.
Yeah, and when you look at these people, you look at other people, and they seem to possess a confidence that you don't have. And they seem to be able to accomplish things that you struggle to accomplish, and you think it's because of innate worth, innate capability. They're just better than I am. But oftentimes they're not dealing with what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
I liken it to eating a bowl of cereal. Anyone can eat a bowl of cereal. What if I strapped a 30-pound weight to your arm?
Make it a lot harder.
Right, it makes it a lot harder.
Impossible.
But you start to think, well, she can eat a bowl of cereal, why can't I? Well, it's not about the task, it's about the weight. And when you carry the weight of trauma with you, it's also the weight of depression, it's the weight of anxiety, it's the weight of crippling self-loathing a lot of times, or one of those manifestations. And we need to look at, okay, I either need to remove the weight, or if the weight can't be removed, how can I get stronger so that I can function and have the confidence and do the things that I want to do?
Yeah.
Now, you were telling me when we were talking about this before, there's a lot of physical symptoms of trauma and how this affects the way you think, how it affects your health, your immune system. Tell me more about that, because that's where you completely eclipse me on this subject.
So it's fascinating to know the emotional and the mental effects of trauma, and they're real and they're there. But there is also very physical effects of trauma. Once you experience trauma, it literally changes your nervous system, and you experience life through a different nervous system than you did before. And that's one of the reasons why you might feel like you're a different person after trauma than you were before, because it literally affects your nervous system.
In what ways? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
Is it easier to get sick? Is it easier to, what does that even look like?
So your energy becomes so focused on suppressing the inner chaos that you feel. The effects that we've just talked about during this whole video and how trauma manifests itself. All your energy goes to suppressing that chaos.
Yeah.
And what happens is when you go from this place of believing that your world's safe to no longer believing it's safe, or knowing that it's not safe. In the instance of complex PTSD, is you have hormones in your body that do jobs, right? In very simple form. And so this is the way I like to relate it. Let's say you're driving down the road and the car in front of you slams on their brakes, right? Brake lights go on, you immediately slam on your brakes, and you have this moment of, oh my gosh, like, am I okay? Okay, I'm okay. Everything's okay. And
heart's pounding, right? Everything's like adrenaline's surged in, So
those arousal emotions of your increased heartbeat, for me, I feel like this wave of heat that goes through my body, right? All those things that happen when the car in front of you slams on their brakes. So in a normal nervous system, someone who hasn't experienced trauma, like the hormones rush in, they make you hyper aware so that you can be sure to protect yourself. You feel the increased heart rate.
Your senses are heightened, right? And so you can deal with the situation and...
your senses are heightened, and you're that way for 30 seconds, a minute, whatever it is, and they go back down pretty quickly. The difference is, for someone who has experienced trauma and continues to experience the PTSD from that trauma, it doesn't go back down. You stay dialed up to a 10, and this wreaks havoc on your immune system, your nervous system, so much to the fact that prolonged PTSD can show up in your body as autoimmune disorders.
Wow. So people don't even diagnose it psychologically first. They diagnose it as an autoimmune disorder. Sometimes they see, okay, you're getting sick a lot, or you're having a hard time developing antibodies, for example, or things like that. And that can lead them down the path to discovering, oh, the source of this is actually psychological, right? It's this traumatic experience. And there is such a huge link between the body and the mind. I mean, my entire field, my entire therapeutic field right now is so focused on overall wellness for this very purpose. When I'm dealing with people who are depressed and anxious, one of the first things I have them address is getting enough sleep, their diet, and their exercise routine. And I tell people, exercise for sanity, not for vanity. It's not about how you look in a swimsuit. It's about, are you staying sane, right? The anxiety, the depression. And there's such a huge link between how you eat, I mean, all the basic things, eating, nutrition, exercise, and your overall wellness. But the reverse is also true, right? That it can start in the mind, and you can have this intense psychological experience that then just completely wreaks havoc on your body. And you find yourself exhausted and worn out and with nothing left to give. And then that further feeds into the psychology of, I'm weak, I'm worthless. And that's not the case at all. You're experiencing a trauma. And that's what's causing all of this.
Absolutely. And I love the way it's explained in the book, The Body Keeps the Score. It's an excellent book to read regarding trauma. But the doctor that wrote that book explains it this way. When something reminds traumatized people of the past, their right brain reacts as if the traumatic event were happening in the present. Fighting those unseen dangers is exhausting and leaves you fatigued, depressed, and worried. These attempts to maintain control over unbearable physiological reactions can result in a whole range of physical symptoms, including fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and other autoimmune diseases. Wow. This explains why it is so critical for trauma treatment to engage the entire individual, both spirit, mind, and body.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about, the whole wellness package, right? You can't just attack it psychologically. You have to address what's going on physiologically as well. You have to address the immune system, you have to address the overall health, and that feeds into the mental health. It's that whole back and forth.
And I would say that one of the biggest challenges is having a traumatic event, maybe not even realizing it was a traumatic event, but not understanding the effects of trauma. So you go to this place of, it's my fault, I'm crazy, what's wrong with me? And that just continues to devolve, right? It just continues to get worse. It becomes a cyclical something's wrong with me.
Yeah. And then you just have a hard time functioning every day. And the future looks bleak and hopeless, and it just feels like you're never going to get out of it.
Yeah.
Which is why you put this whole thing together.
Because the future isn't bleak and it's not hopeless.
Yeah. And people do recover from trauma every single day. And there's a system, there's proven systems for accomplishing this. And a lot of times people don't get the help they need because they don't know where to turn or they don't know who to ask.
Right. Or they've tried, and the things they've tried in the past doesn't work.
Yeah.
Or it works a little bit, but not for very long.
And this could be because the system that they're trying or the person that they're working with isn't fully trained or knowing what they're doing, or it could be it's just not a fit for that specific individual, right?
And very few systems for healing, systems or programs for healing from trauma include that spirit, mind, and body connection.
Yeah. Hot dang. Let's talk about how to get it done.
Sweet. So video 3 is going to be all about how to heal from trauma. We look forward to seeing you there.